Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you again to our Energy Forum 2021, where we continue discussions on very relevant topics in the energy sector, in the field of environment, in the field of macroeconomy, energy security, geopolitics, and geostrategic issues. I'm your host, Robert JUODKA, as usual, and the program is presented to you by the Estonian Chamber of Commerce in Lithuania, Polish-Lithuanian Chamber of Commerce, PRIMUS law firm, and our dear partners, the Estonian Embassy, the Latvian, the Polish Embassy in Lithuania, the Finnish Embassy in Lithuania, and all our other partners. The forum is powered by ENEFIT, the green energy producer in Lithuania and the Baltics. In previous issues and previous editions, we have covered a multitude of topics ranging from electricity, gas, electricity networks, gas networks, transmission system operations, as well as autonomous vehicles. Now let's turn over to transport. Transport is one of the main emitters of CO2 gases in our atmosphere, in our daily lives. None of us can survive without transport, without logistics, without input from this essential means of communication, delivery, and other economic connectivity, so to say. Without transport and logistics, nothing happens in our world, starting from aviation to finalizing it with automotive. Obviously, the automotive industry is on the biggest verge of change since, I would say, 100 years, where the horse was exchanged to a car in the beginning of the 20th century. At the moment, we're in the process of exchanging the internal combustion engine to a electric vehicle that is powered either by a solar or wind generated power or by hydro energy, hydrogen fueled power cells. And this change and this transformation is happening in a way slower than we would expect it, but in a way it's also way faster than many have predicted even 10 years ago. So today we are going to talk how the automotive industry and how the transport industry will be transformed by the new developments and how it will look like in essentially 9 years, by 2030, how the top 5 automakers will be impacted, and how our automotive world will look like in 9 years. These topics will be presented to us by a renowned expert, Mr. Aleksander Rajch, who is a board member and director of PSPA, or Polskie Stowarzyszenie Paliw Alternatywnych, which is a Polish Alternative Fuels Association. It is a major association, a major NGO in the area of integration of green energy solutions and alternative fuels into our daily lives. So without further ado, Aleksander, the floor is yours.
Okay.
You hear us?
Thank you. Yes, I represent PSPA. We focus mostly on zero emission transport, road transport, but of course all the issues you've listed are important. I think it's important to note that our view is a reflection of really a cross-section of the whole e-mobility value chain, because we represent close to 150 entities, not only OEMs, car makers, but also infrastructure operators, financial institutions, energy companies, even oil and gas companies that are part of the transition towards zero emission transport. Academic institutions, municipalities. We have ongoing cooperations with over 50 of them. We just completed one of the largest industry congresses in Poland in cooperation with the mayor of Łódź. So, and it attracted 1,000 people, 900 people on site. So really a lot going on in our projects, and we really represent this market fully. To address, I think, the issue that you mentioned, which is the future of the OEMs, the car makers, top 5 brands or makers in a global perspective. I mean, first of all, I think the most important change is e-mobility. I think for personal vehicles, e-mobility will be the future, and already this is happening. We're seeing this, and it's irrevocable. It will happen, and this is something we need to face. I think it's important to note we don't have to face this as a threat, but we have to face this as an opportunity. And this is, I think, something that needs to be emphasized and can't be emphasized enough. Because if we're talking about the perspective of 2030, for example, taking into account the Polish market, which is one of the biggest markets in Europe, the largest market in the CE region, we at the moment have 30,000 electric vehicles, with a little over half of that BEVs. Not too much if you take into account the size of the economy. We have under 2,000 charging stations, public charging stations. So this is, again, not a very large number. We communicate this information to the market every month, noting the rises and the decreases. It's increasing only now, fortunately enough, and what we call an e-mobility index, which we publish every month to show the market growth. But we also have predictions, and these predictions show that by only 2025 already, there will be nearly 300,000 electric vehicles. And this is personal vehicles and delivery vehicles, because in Poland, we see that's the direction of the development for e-mobility that is most discernible. So 291,000 by 2025, and perhaps by 2030, the mythical million, as we say, because the Polish government has been communicating this message of reaching 1 million electric vehicles soon. Well, maybe not so soon, but in 9 years, we see that this may happen. In terms of charging stations, the trend will reverse, because at this point presently, we have more public charging stations than private charging stations. In 225, which is for us a better number, because it's easier to identify the real predictions, the forecasts at a closer range from the data that we can acquire from the market. So we see that this number will change to 43,000 public charging points and 100,000, circa about 100,000 private charging points. So this is a very important trend that already shows where we're going in terms of the growth. Of course, these are numbers or trends or tendencies that are discernible for the entire CE region, and quite vividly, actually, that we're in an early point of development, a lot of potential also for companies coming in, investing, and other sectors, which I hope we will get to also in our discussion, like the battery sector or the heavy transport or the mass communication transport, that are also developing along with it. And what we see in Western and Northern Europe and those economies where e-mobility is thriving at the moment, with some of them reaching nearly 10% of EVs in their national car parks, this is a direction that we have to pursue. And we're getting a lot of the good lessons and good benchmarks of how to proceed. It's only a matter of implementing. So car makers will be at a point where they will have to transition from manufacturing ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles, towards zero emission vehicles. In terms of personal vehicles, it is a challenge of transforming their entire manufacturing supply chain. For the CE region, this means probably an outflow of car manufacturing, because it is already observable that we're not going to have many EVs produced on our markets.
No.
So we have to focus on the aligned industries that are close to that. And
component industries, essentially like tires or electricity elements or sensors, something like that.
Yes, that is absolutely true. But then again, one has to take into account, and this of course varies on the information distributed by the various producers, but an electric vehicles has 25%, or some estimate 33% of the parts in a conventional vehicle. So already again, you have a phenomenon where a lot of the manufacturing of components and parts will be decreased, because there's less demand for these parts in an electric vehicle. So they will have to be reskilled and retrained, these people. And in Poland, if you take that into account, the industry related to the manufacturing of ICE vehicles strictly is at 255,000 people. They are now within this industry. What's more, for Poland, which is a specificity of our country, most of these manufacturing sites are located in Silesia, which will also be struck by the transformation of the energy system. Because of course, going away from coal and from coal mines and from coal energy plants will deprive Silesia of some of these jobs as well. So you have a second trend coming on with the automotive industry, where this will change a lot. And this, of course, is the truth, I think, for be it the top 5 or all car makers in the world, that they will have to face this challenge of introducing this culture of technological change and elasticity and maybe flexibility to their employees, that the industry will change, their manufacturing supply chains will change, so they need to reskill and reshape their competencies. So this is one thing. The second thing, of course, is the EV production. And the third thing is acquiring all the necessary technology. For example, Poland is one of the globally leading battery producers. We have these battery producing facilities on our western border for obvious reasons, supplying OEMs from Western markets, mostly the German market, because this is where the direction will head. I think some of the challenges lie in the R&D sector and the educational sector, because it's really the innovation that drives this. I hear that you had discussions regarding autonomous mobility. Yes. This is the future as well. And this is something we're also involved in. Of course, in Poland, it's at a very early development level, I think maybe even inexistent in some ways. But the CE region is pretty much the same, but for countries such as the USA, Israel, China, these are topics they discuss now. So this is also something we have to be ready for. And I think that OEMs will face a very dynamic transformation period in the coming years up until 2030, because first of all, these personal vehicles going to EVs, heavy vehicles going to a technology we are still not yet defined at, and then close and soon after, autonomous technologies. So this is, I think, in a maybe brief overview before we go into detail, how I see this coming on.
What about trains and planes? What about that?
Well, we are mostly involved in road transport, but as you can see in the Fit for 55 proposal, the legislation proposal brought forth by the European Commission, it pertains to that as well. And I mean, extending the ETS system, for example, this is a very important factor. We don't know the structure of this extension, of how it will be regulated yet, but we know they're heading in that direction. And it is, of course, something that is desirable for us, I think. But what's important to note is that extending the ETS system will have implications not only for the aviation or maritime transport, but for the road transport as well, because it will address one of the most burning issues regarding EVs, which is the price. Because of course, there's a lot of, maybe not accusations, but speculation about how the market will develop if EVs continue to be less attractive price-wise than their ICE counterparts. And the extension of ETS touches upon that. But in our Congress, we just had that I mentioned at the beginning of my statements, we had this discussion, and we had these new companies coming into Poland that address, for example, heavy transportation, but in the heavy industry, where there are very close, short distances, and even the mining industry, for example, where you can replace all the diesels and ICE vehicles with electric vehicles, because they don't need a very big range, and they can work on electric power and really cut off a lot of the pollution that's coming on. So I think you see by both the legislation direction of development, as well as some of the manufacturers and producers, also in the maritime transport industry, where there's a lot of talk about electric powertrains as well. So this is coming on in all sectors, I think.
But you mentioned that the change over to electric vehicles will inevitably mark, let's say, dying or decrease of existing industries in actually socially sensitive regions. So obviously there will be a political backlash, regulatory kind of, let's say, resistance and popular resistance to kind of to decrease labor places and to essentially lower the incomes of affected populations. So what is your opinion on how this, let's say, regulatory backlash, public backlash, lobby backlash will impact the sector? What could be the, let's say, slowdowns, or what's your opinion?
Well, I mean, yeah, we just, there was a study conducted by BCG regarding the entire European market, the EU market, and in regard to the transformation of the automotive industry and its effect on the job market. We, of course, we were cooperating with BCG to do this on the Polish market, and it showed a huge discrepancy and an enormous difference between these markets, because the challenges are entirely different. First of all, is something I mentioned, which is the outflow of the OEM manufacturing power in terms of EVs from these markets. But that is only one area. I mean, the backlash, I wouldn't expect it to appear so quickly, mostly because of one factor. The entire industry and economy is heading towards zero emission transport. So there will be we shouldn't expect much backlash. I think the backlash, as you call it, or some kind of opposition, or maybe uneasiness, will be observable against the legislative proposal. So what's happening with Fit for 55, we're facing a big debate in the European Parliament in the coming months. I think just a couple of days ago was the final date for lodging the Fit for 55 commentaries and opinions. And we're facing now a period of debate. And this is, I think, the area where some of the states, for example, reliant on coal as a main energy fuel. Poland produces energy in 80% from coal. So we're, for example, a market that will probably have some uneasiness with some areas of Fit for 55. But in terms of transport, the e-mobility is the only direction, or zero emission transport is the only direction it's headed. So I don't see much of a backlash here, but what I do see is a number of obstacles. So of course, jobs will be lost. And we, in our study with BCG for Poland, we assumed three scenarios. A scenario that is a pessimistic scenario, where really things are just as they are right now. So the market kind of persists, the technology development echoes into our market, but really, we don't really react actively. And so things go on just calmly. And in this way, we will lose a lot of jobs. I think in our calculation, it was at least 17,000, because of course, this is a net number. You will lose a lot in the classic automotive industry, but it will be somewhat compensated by the aligned industries, like the battery sector, like the infrastructure sector, and so on. But what we would like to happen, and I think what the whole market would like to happen, is for a lot of this workforce in the conventional transportation sector to be reskilled into the new sector. And how do we do this? Well, we have this pessimistic scenario where nothing is done, and then we have this just neutral scenario where some things are done. So in July, for example, in Poland, we just had a subsidy program launched called the My EV program. It's quite a rational program, actually, that has been launched by the public administration. It was based on the lessons learned from two pilot programs 2 years ago. So a lot of good conclusions and really a lot of smart remarks to be put into this program. And we're seeing a lot of traction to it, and it's being accepted by the market in the positive response. And it will influence a lot of the EV acquisitions in the coming months. We're expecting a similar program to be brought on for the charging infrastructure as well. And so once this takes place, then we have this neutral scenario where the public administration responds with some incentives and subsidies. The OEMs bring their products to market, the portfolios are being expanded rapidly. And so things are being discernible where the market starts to develop, but still not at a very in-depth level. And there we see a compensation where a net number of jobs may even increase up to 5,000 to 6,000. But that's a net number again, because we keep on losing these jobs in the ICE industry. But then what happens if we take things seriously? And this is what we call an ambitious scenario, because we were thinking about calling it optimistic, but optimistic is too easy because it takes a lot of work and effort. So we call it an ambitious scenario where we approach the market in a way where we're saying, okay, what we need to do is really launch a lot of R&D programs, innovation building, and so on. Because, for example, the battery industry in Poland, it generates 2% of our export value, the entire economy. It's really a huge component if you take, how much of a small industry it is in terms of all the other industries present. And we have the largest manufacturing plant in Poland by LG Green Solution with 100 gigawatt hours annual production. It's 3 times larger than the second place Tesla in Nevada gigafactory. So enormous production capacity. We have 61 companies on the market producing various components, modules, involved in recycling, battery recycling, very important topic. It seems like we have the entire supply chain for batteries closed. But what we don't really have is the thought and innovation that would lead the next step into technology of batteries, the oncoming technology. And you see this approach completely different, for example, in Spain or France, where institutes are launched for battery R&D programs. And so they're thinking about the next step. We are number one in the EU and third in the world in terms of this step. So production of what's going on now. But what we're saying in this ambitious scenario is we need to start thinking in all ways about this reskilling and rebuilding the competence. So the OEMs, like I mentioned, they have to do these employee programs where they can actually tell people, listen, this is an oncoming revolution. We need to be ready for it. It's doable. Let's make these training programs, educational programs, reskilling programs. Then the public administration needs to do a very similar thing. So start really, introducing in their educational programs, even maybe in middle school, but mostly, of course, universities and higher education, this kind of new approach that we're getting away from the conventional manufacturing industry and engineering industry into a zero emission transportation reality. And then, of course, the people themselves. So organizations like us that raise awareness, that educate the community, the society, the wider public opinion about what's coming. We need to also, and we're of course involved in this, but this needs to happen on a more wider scale. Really educate the community, not only that they will drive electric vehicles, but that the job market will change. And since it pertains to, as I said, for just the ICE manufacturing, 255,000, but altogether the automotive market in Poland, it's 500,000 people. That's the wide reach. Very focused on automotive is 397,000, so 400,000. Still a lot of people, still a lot of jobs, and still a big discussion to address. And so if we do all this work together, we can achieve this ambitious scenario where the net value of growth will be 20,000 jobs, 16,000 to be precise, but approximately 20, and where these net values will actually reflect the real values of how the job market will be compensated. So this is, I think, one of the key challenges is how to address this issue and not only think about manufacturing, but think about also the R&D value.
Okay, so that's very interesting. But of course, Poland is probably one of the bigger automotive producers in Europe. But of course, it's no match for Germany or France in these figures. How many people are employed there. So I guess the political impact will be way bigger there. But we will see.
That's true. But they have OEMs that will produce EVs.
Yes.
And so their manufacturing power will clearly transform into EV production as well. And some of the vehicles that are being assembled in Poland, even this assembly will also be brought back to their original markets. So it's a different thing, because we will mostly have to focus on aligned industries. Yeah. They can still keep on being focused on OEMs, on the manufacturing of vehicles.
So that is the biggest difference, definitely. But turning back to batteries, the ways how to accumulate power and how to transmit it. So obviously Tesla has been the PR forefront of battery technology for many years. But actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but Tesla is actually not really producing any batteries itself. It's Panasonic that's essentially doing it. Tesla is just branding them, Tesla batteries, and obviously the question of technology ownership and let's say technology transfer, technology R&D comes here at the forefront. And batteries are also changing. The biggest problem is that the batteries cannot provide enough capacity as they are now. So for long enough ranges of driving and also recycling and production cost and everything, short life cycles. So what are the potential developments in this area?
Well, some of it I think I touched upon, but of course I think the main issue is energy storage, of course, and this is an issue that doesn't only pertain to vehicles, but also, for example, to trains, and I think storage plays a big part here. And I think the overall, in terms of batteries, you have to think on a wider scale, also basing on where we're going with this, because EVs will not be the only means of transportation in the near future. Cities will become less populated by vehicles, and city centers will have less vehicles. You will have electric bicycles, electric scooters. This is already, of course, taking place. We call it micromobility, last mile solutions. But this is a challenge for the battery sector, also for the long haul transportation. We did a project this year, just 2 months ago, we published a report also. We were testing a 27-ton heavy transportation vehicle and a truck. And we were testing it in short delivery ranges between cities, because of course, an electric vehicle, a heavy transportation vehicle, will not cover 2,000 kilometers, mainly due to battery challenges, but it will cover 300 kilometers. And for a country like Poland, this means delivering from city to city or from manufacturing plant to city. And so these are kind of medium distances that will allow electric vehicles to actually develop. And this is something that is happening also in Poland. And so we're manufacturing heavy vehicles. We have MAN facilities, we have Volvo facilities, we have Daimler facilities for this. We also have one Polish facility for heavy vehicles. So here it's actually very good, because this is another one of those areas which will compensate and merge with our battery potential, because batteries made for these vehicles will be then implemented in the vehicles, manufacturing on our market, and being able to respond to this challenge. So you have this. And then, of course, the battery technology going into, and storage going into both energy supply for households, which is a whole entire challenge, and then energy supply for other means of transportation, be it maritime or aviation. So, but this is a completely different area. And here, of course, there are discussions that perhaps hydrogen will be the response. We think that for vehicles, e-mobility, pure e-mobility, BEVs will be the main technology and main basis. But what we're promoting is zero emission transport. So if it goes into hydrogen directions, direct injection, perhaps technologies as well, then that's something we believe is good for the climate, for the community, for everyone. But we see now that most of transport will be within e-mobility. So what we have some of these battery companies that are cooperating with us as our members. Some of them are external companies, not yet members of PSPA, but they're all focused around the same topics, which is first of all the R&D potential that needs to be developed, which we discussed, the production to be sustained, and for demand to be kept up, which is now not a problem because the EV industry is developing, but also the future. And the future is not yet so known, but of course it's focused around, I think, mostly solving the challenges related to recycling. So reducing the influence of lithium-ion batteries and modules after they're being used up, which is not such a big phenomenon now. And it's really good that we started the discussion at this point, because most of the used battery cells, they will be in the next decade or even 15 years. That will be a huge income of recycling challenges. And we see that by the time we will probably be ready. What's good to see is that, first of all, this recycling is also taking place here in Europe. So it's not being thrown out of the continent to a different location, but it's actually here locally being developed, which is very good. And the second thing we see is that producers, and we've spoken to some major producers like Northvolt, but also Daimler is producing batteries as well. And they're saying they're actively pursuing these different technologies, testing different metals and testing different potential paths to make these batteries even lighter for the government, for the environment. So it's taking place, but I think the real technology is not yet defined. It's too many different directions. When it comes, of course, to branding batteries, well, that's of course the truth. As I said, the LG Green Solution produces enormous amounts of batteries. They go to Oems of various brands. So I think it's a universal trait.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But let's turn over to charging stations. You mentioned at the beginning that at the moment, almost everywhere, essentially all of the charging stations are publicly funded. And in most of the cases, you can charge your electric vehicles free of charge. And also essentially that helps a lot for those who use it. but nothing comes free of charge in the long run. Somebody has to pay for it, and it's obviously inevitable that private monies and private infrastructure developments will have to come up and join the public ones. But what could be the, let's say, business case for private enterprises to develop the electricity charging networks? Will we have like a combination of let's say existing fuel stations where there will be, I don't know, electric charging stations in addition to classical fuel refueling places? Will there be something totally different, totally separate? Will we see new market entrants in that area? What is your prediction?
Well, I mean, for Western Northern Europe, the conditions are entirely different. And when we have these meetings with NGOs that represent, we're a member organization of AVER, the European Mobility Association. My associate Maciej Mazur, the managing director of PSPA, he's actually vice president of AVER. So we participate in all these discussions quite a lot, actually. And I mean, it shows the markets are entirely different. So for Poland, which I can speak freely about, is the challenges are manifold. First of all, the low number of charging stations, and this is an issue to be discussed. Just today, we will be in the Polish Parliament discussing the amendments to the Act on E-Mobility and Alternative Fuels, which is an act that regulates this market. And there's a lot on infrastructure to be touched upon then. But we're still speaking about the amendment, and the market is going so dynamically. So we're trying to catch up with these issues. But first of all, it takes about, and this is a very optimistic perspective, it takes about half a year to be able to install a public charging stations in Poland because of the regulatory setbacks. So, and this is a very optimistic view. It usually takes much longer. So it's very difficult to convince investors, businesses to come in and start developing the sector because it's an enormously long process and a much longer one than in Western and Northern Europe, as I said. So
the main question is, what will be the margin? You do that, and what will you earn? What's the business case?
It depends, and it depends on various factors. But this is the first problem. So what we have to address first, as PSPA, as the market, and as we have, I think, all the players in Poland regarding charging infrastructure. So we, in our portfolio of members. So the first thing we have to address is the regulation, and this is for sure, because they will not even think about a business case and then margin of return if they don't have a good and valid kind of vision of what they can do here. That's public stations. In terms of replacing old fueling stations with EV charging infrastructure, this is another regulatory issue because, for example, this is important for the 10T network. If you take that into consideration, on highways and national roads, which are the main kind of arteries in terms of road transportation in Poland, you have two types of areas where you can stop the vehicle. One is an area without a fueling station, and another area is with a fueling station. Now, these rest stops are, if there is no gas station operating there, then it's the national authority of roads and highways that can make a tender to install public infrastructure there. If there is an operator present, like Shell, BP, or Orlen, or one of those companies, then they organize that tender for the entire rest stop. So this again creates quite an obstacle because charging infrastructure operators have to construct two different offers for a private partner and for a public partner. And again, with this, it creates some sort of problems, although we're seeing some development in this area, mostly in Poland by Greenway, a member of ours, a leading company in Poland in terms of charging infrastructure. And they are approaching this issue very intensively and actually getting a lot of traction there. Energy prices in Poland are rising. They're rising all over Europe, but for Poland, this is especially true, partly because of the coal-based energy mix, partly because of insufficient sources. We don't have sufficient supply for energy. So energy prices will rise. So resolving this matter of investment and coming into the market to invest and resolving all the regulatory issues, and then facing the large energy prices, which of course kind of deflect the public demand for charging. poses a lot of problems, mostly related to the opponents of e-mobility, who come in and say, okay, so this is going to be expensive, difficult, hard, let's not do it. That's why we're saying we need a public support program from the public administration for the state to kind of subsidize and dynamize this process. This needs to happen in two paths. One path, legislation, needs to happen very quickly. We're working on it. As I said, I hope it's happening. And the second path, the subsidy area. So the state needs to really, step in and support this program actively. And we're seeing this. We're having these discussions, and it's ongoing. And I think it will happen. It's CPOs and system operators that need to be addressed as well. Things need to be facilitated for them. And this is these challenges, I think, are true for the entire region, for the CE. We, in June, with the support of Vice President of the European Commission, Maros Šefčovič, we launched this advocacy platform called the CE Green Transport Initiative, GTI for short. And we've been getting partners from the entire CE region, from Romania, Bulgaria, Croatia, Slovenia, Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, so really the entire region. We're inviting everyone to come in, and we're trying to shape this messaging so that also the EU is very aware of what's going on here, because we're seeing these predictions by NGOs in Western Northern Europe. We're seeing what's happening with the legislation proposals and the discussions happening in Brussels and Strasbourg and other key areas of the EU decision-making process. And they seem not to be very aware of what's going on in these markets, what the real challenges are. The charging infrastructure is a big challenge like that, but they don't have the data to address it. So this is why we're trying to initiate these programs as well as PSPA, and I see other counterparts in other markets, to raise the awareness regarding the problem of charging infrastructure and how it's being developed. And so to respond to your question, I think this business model will rely on the very closely incoming months on how these challenges will be addressed. It's a very good moment to come into the market, still a very fresh market, still a very young market in terms of e-mobility. And there's a lot of Polish potential, for example, for our market that specializes in manufacturing, servicing, and this is very important. And another business area that may develop within this, and it will develop for sure, but it may develop in our region, is the IT potential, software, and then everything that can be done there. It's an enormous and vast potential that is also a big business area to be addressed.
But you mentioned that essentially a big chunk of the development will depend on state subsidies. But do you envision any possibility of development of the infrastructure of charging stations without state subsidies?
Yes. For example, private charging stations will develop because with subsidy programs for EVs, if we address ICE leakage, as it is called, so the CE region has a big problem with incoming very old ICE vehicles into our markets. Just since 2000, the year 2000, we've imported as Poland 16 million of these vehicles. Most of them diesel vehicles, very old, even sometimes fifth or sixth-hand vehicles. The average age of used vehicles in Poland is now at 14 years. That's a very old, car, and it's a big problem. Because these cars are very attractive price-wise. And so this ICE leakage is a big problem, of course. We're trying to, support programs like ones I know are present in Lithuania to increase importing used EVs, which is a good solution. But why am I addressing this? Is because once we resolve some of these issues, the subsidies that are already in place for EV acquisition, EVs will grow. There will be more of them. The portfolios of OEMs are growing enormously. And I mean, they've been halted a little bit because of COVID, but I think at the beginning of next year, you will see an incredible, wide range offer of EVs within each OEM portfolio. Once this starts spreading into the population, as I said, if you look at Poland, 300,000 vehicles in 4 years, these people will need to charge their vehicles. And since public infrastructure may not develop so fast, and we're saying it probably won't, as I said, the trend will reverse. Private charging infrastructure will absolutely thrive. And most people that I know even today in Poland that have EVs, they rely on their own private infrastructure at this point. So infrastructure will develop, but in the private direction. And if there is no such subsidy programs, as you said, there is no reaction from the public administration, which in Poland I know is oncoming, but perhaps in other CE markets, perhaps not. Then we will face a situation where the public infrastructure will shrink, and there will be a huge reliance on private infrastructure. For example, and this is not due to public administration, lack of action, but due to the trends that occurred in Norway, most EVs are charged at home. Many of them not even in charging stations, but from the plug. So there are markets that went that way, and it's just a tendency that takes place. So if public infrastructure is not supported adequately in the coming future, then the private charging infrastructure will thrive, because two things: EVs will enter the market, and e-mobility will be enforced by the regulator.
Okay, but turning over to the general figures, and that would be probably our last question. What is your prediction, by 2030? How many percentage or what percentage of vehicles on the street will be electric vehicles? And let's talk about the individual sector here, not about the general automotive, but individual cars. How many, percent, your opinion?
Well, I mean, in 2030, for example, for our market, we have 20 million vehicles on the roads today registered. There may be more, close to 30 million with all the transit, transportation, everything, but 20 million altogether. If we're saying that by 2030 we will have 1 million electric vehicles, that provides you with a percentage, I think, so 5%, yes. But this is, of course, fully electric personal vehicle. We are also seeing a huge popularity of mass transportation vehicles, so buses, saying it directly. And we are I think we have one of the largest fleets of buses in general. 98% of that is diesel. That will change entirely as well, because, for example, already Warsaw is the third in Europe in terms of electric buses in its fleet. So this is a very popular direction that's being pursued. We made this calculation that electric buses covered 1 million kilometers in Poland already. So it's very popular. And again, the state is also responding with subsidy programs for local authorities to acquire these buses. So this is another element of the fleet that will be changed. As I said, the medium long-haul transportation will probably pursue an area of e-mobility as well. So I think this percentage will be slightly larger than 5%. But for CE regions, CE countries, for the CE region, I think this will be the average direction of development. Although one has to also take into account that in general, vehicle fleets will drop, because I mean, you have 54 clean transport zones in Europe already, where the city centers are being, deprived of EV vehicles in city centers. There's shared economy solutions being developed, EVs coming in, electric buses and so on. So there will be less vehicles. And so perhaps this percentage will be larger due to this tendency. And we're now working also on developing clean transport zones in Poland. And so we just recently had a declaration, which we supported this whole program, a declaration signed by 12 of the largest Polish cities, that they want to take matters into their own hands and develop clean transport zones. This will influence a drop in vehicles in general, for sure. If this is successful, we sincerely hope so. So in just pure numbers, absolute numbers, 1 million vehicles in 2030 for a market that has 20 million vehicles. What the future will hold, we hope it's even better.
Okay, thank you for that. So with this positive note, I would like to thank you and conclude our today's discussion on future of automotive and the future of electric mobility in the automotive sector. And we had Aleksander Rajch, who very kindly presented us with his very deep insights on the market and on the potential developments of social infrastructure and other elements in this very, very much developing area. And let's see what the future will bring us, And I hope that the developments will be faster than we just discussed here today. But as said, future is always an unknown. So time will tell. Time will tell.
Thank you. What is known is we will have e-mobility and zero emission transport. That is for sure.
Definitely. Thank you, Aleksander, and thank you all our viewers, and stay tuned for our next edition. As discussed, every week we have a new edition, new speaker, a new topic, and stay tuned with our Energy Forum 2021. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, our YouTube cluster, and stay with us. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Have a great day.